Good morning to my friends in California. Good afternoon to everybody who's west of the mountains.
Well, is his
Am I audible? I've been asked several times by various people what I'm going to be talking about today, and I've given various answers, and I think that probably we'll figure out by the end what it is that I've been talking about. Perhaps it's impermanence. Perhaps it's getting old. Perhaps it's making sure you drink enough water when you go up in the mountains. We'll find out. I am not, in fact, a very good student of the ancient writings, really of teachings in general. I tend to focus on one at a time and try to go as deep as I can before moving on. 5 years ago, I was the head student at the Summer Ango, and the theme was the Gata on the Han. Life and death is the great matter. Time passes swiftly and opportunity is lost. Each of us should wake up, awaken, take heed. Do not squander your life. Well, in the process of trying to digest that then and since then, I've come upon the one thing that I want to understand most clearly. We're being told to awaken, wake up. What is the awakening? And I think that I've started to draw a little bit of a hint about the awakening from the chant that we just chanted about the Dharma. Now we see it, hear it, receive, and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning. Can we make it real in our lives? That's what realizing is, with our own direct personal experience. So, trying to dig into that some. Dogen, in his early writing, Gakudo Yojinshu, has a brief passage where he is quoting from Nagarjuna, who said, "The mind that sees into the flux of arising and decaying and recognizes the transient nature of the world is also known as the Bodhi mind." Suzuki Roshi paraphrased that passage from Dogen, saying, Dogen Zenji emphasizes the way-seeking mind. And way-seeking mind, according to Dogen, is the mind to have direct feeling of the evanescence of life. When we feel the evanescence of life directly, we will not have any more ego-centered idea, and our practice will be quite pure and strong. That is the most important point in our way. Now, the way that I read that is basically that we have to experience impermanence, not just accept what we've read about it, what we're told about it. And that brings me to the Dharma that I've been working on, the Dharma passage that I've been working on for quite some time now. The Buddha, apparently very early in his teaching, taught what is now called the Upajjhatthana Sutta, which is the 5 remembrances that he wanted us all to be contemplating daily or more often. It's pretty simple. I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to avoid growing old. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to avoid illness or injury. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to avoid death. All that is dear to me and everyone that I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to avoid being separated from them. And finally, my actions are my only true belongings. I cannot avoid the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. Now that all sounds sort of a little bit grim, but I think that the point that the Buddha was making is this is true. These are all true. And that the reason to contemplate them daily, starting as early as we can, really, is to overcome all the pride and conceit that we have of, well, I'm 25 years old, I'm never going to get old. And I'm certainly not ever going to be as disgustingly old as that old man over there. I'm never going to get sick. I'm not going to be like those people that just can't get around, that have to be taken care of. That's not going to happen to me. And then, of course, the ultimate vanity that somehow we're not going to die. Which, of course, we all know, oh, we are going to die, but not now. I don't have to worry about that, really. And it'll happen easily. And the Buddha wanted people to really not be doing that, but to be encountering the actual experience of getting older, being sick, and ultimately the experience of dying, the experience of losing everything. So the Upajjhatthana Sutta really kicked in for me in the last year when I realized that I was now older than my father was when he died. And even so, I mean, I read it, I contemplated it, I spent time on it in Zazen, I spent time on it off the cushion, and I was telling people about it, but I don't think that I really took it in. All of that study, though, came kind of to a head this past late summer when I was with Nancy, my wife. Hi, Nancy. Climbing in the mountains in the Adirondacks, where we've been climbing together for more than 30 years. And we were going up a lovely little mountain. I say a little mountain, it's 3,000 feet, but the bigger mountains are all over 4,000 feet, and we've done those. And I have at least admitted that my age, which was 77, precluded my going to the higher peaks. I just don't have the knees for it. I don't have the stamina for it. I don't have the speed for it. So what was once a warm-up mountain, Hopkins Mountain, was now the destination, the goal. And it is a goal. When you're climbing in the mountains, it's really hard to forget about the fact that there's a peak that you're trying to get to. You don't forget about that. You're trying to get there, which tends to keep you from really engaging with what's around you as much as you might. This particular mountain it's very familiar to us. It starts off with a short grassy stretch, and then there's beautiful open woods of hardwoods and pines mixed. The fall colors were starting to show up. There are some steep stretches with like 8 or 9 foot, nearly vertical climbs, where you got to pick your footholds among the rocks and roots and things. And there's beautiful ledges with views of the valley below. Now I'm slow, and at some point, about 10 minutes from the top, for some people, probably closer to 15 or 20 minutes from the top for me, we had paused briefly and were overtaken by a man who was climbing quite briskly, and who wanted to let us know that this was his first real mountain climb since he had shattered his hip earlier in the year, and now it was all better, and he was going to the top, and I'm talking fast because he talked faster. He really wanted us to know about things. Well, Nancy had several months before had her hip replaced, and so a little conversation about hips developed, and it became clear that he was going to continue explaining about hips all the way to the top and however long anybody would stay with him. So I admitted my slowness and said that perhaps he and Nancy should go on ahead. Nancy, for bless her, listened to him all the way to the top. I don't think he really stopped talking about his hip and how cool he was about. And I got to the top finally, and they were up there, and he was still talking about his hip, and yeah. It was really nice to be at the top. It was just as beautiful as ever. There's an incredible view of mountains and Lake Champlain miles and miles away. You can see an enormous amount of stuff, and you feel like you're on top of the world. And even as I was enjoying it, I found myself wondering, am I going to get back here again? This might be the last time I'm up here on this mountain. And I started to, the old Upajjhana Sutra came in, and there I was. I am of the nature to grow old. I cannot avoid my aging. But I don't need to worry. This is the reason it was hard for me to get up here is because I haven't been keeping up with my PT. I'm a little overweight. I'll be fine. That's part of a history of soldiering on that I have had for almost all of my life. When I was 2.5 years old, I was put in the hospital with what they believed was polio at the time. And polio was a pretty awful thing happening in the late 1940s. And turned out not to be. It's something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, but I was paralyzed from the waist down. And I was in the hospital with that for 6 weeks in an isolation unit. And when I came out, the standard litany in my family was, "You're going to be fine. You just keep on going. Go on ahead. Whatever's in front of you, just knock it down or go around it. Don't worry. Just keep going." And that became my mantra. That became my way of being in the world. And it worked for a long time. Meant that I could get through without needing to lean on anybody, not needing any help. And in fact, I became somebody who I identified myself as a helper, as somebody who could be there for other people. Even when I retired, I became a volunteer chaplain in the hospital, taking care. I think that one of the most difficult things, certainly for me and perhaps for many people, is in that aging thing to realize I can't do it alone. I can't. I'm going to need help. And of course, I've always talked about the importance of Sangha, and the fact that that's what we're doing in Sangha is helping each other along this path. But now it was beginning to come into my face because I had to get down. It had taken me 2.5 hours, I believe, to get up a walk that had never taken more than 1 hour and 3/4. And now it was time to head back down. And the knees that had been hurting a little bit on the way up started to hurt a lot. And I kept on soldiering on. I can do this. A little bit of pain, not a big deal. That's just suffering. That's just what life is. It's just dukkha. Well, that trail has a lot of rocks and roots. And I can tell you that it's actually harder to get down those steep vertical faces than it is to go up. There's a lot of drop-offs off to our right hand, and a beautiful little creek running down there, but sometimes that creek was 20 feet below us, filled with rocks. Not a place you wanted to wind up. So I'm going down, and my knees are not working real well, and I'm starting to stumble a little bit, and I can see that Nancy is ahead of me, is pausing quite frequently to look back and make sure that everything's okay. I'm just soldiering on. But it got worse and worse to the point that I started to feel that my legs really actually weren't working properly. It wasn't just that they were weak, it was that they just didn't function properly. It was almost like what I was doing was sort of flapping a leg out in front of me and falling onto it and letting it catch me and doing it again on the other side. And I wound up probably 15 or 20 minutes below the summit. And I realized that I couldn't do this by myself. I said to Nancy, my legs don't work. And I started to wonder what it was. What is keeping my legs from working properly? Could it be a recurrence of that Guillain-Barré syndrome, which does happen? Could it be a stroke? Because I've had a minor stroke. What could it be? Well, I latched onto the least awful possibility, which was I hadn't been drinking enough water and I was dehydrated. And that dehydration can mess you up pretty badly. But I really didn't want to be sick. I didn't even want to be have a dehydration issue. But there I was. There was nothing that I could do. I had to get down this mountain. I had to do it with somebody else, with their help. And I had to admit it. Not only am I getting old, but I am now experiencing exactly what they're talking about, what the Buddha was talking about in having to deal with illness, injury, whatever we wanted to call it. It was right out there. And that's a scary place to be. You start wondering, is this what life is going to be? Am I never going to be able to walk properly again? I know there's people who have encountered much, much worse than that at a younger age than I have. But still, we all are going to have to confront it at some point. I was lucky enough to last until 77 before I had to confront it. And I didn't like it at all. And I was still, even though I was realizing, oh, this is what the Buddha was talking about. This is the reality. But now it may be my permanent reality. But Nancy was continuing to shepherd me down the mountain, making sure that I was drinking what remaining water we had, handing me the hard candies that we've always taken up with us into the mountains. Get that little sugar jolt going, get a little more energy. She was probably by that point pausing about every 3 or 4 steps and turning around to make sure that I was okay. And I was doing some pretty significant pausing too. So there we were, coming down this mountain and aware that it was probably going to be dark by the time we got to the bottom. But I think that my practice was beginning to really kick in then. Remembering that actually all of this stuff that's going on in here is just a representation of my separate self, the self that I think is just, that I think is me. And I was leaving out the connection of this self with everything, with the woods around me, with the leaves on the ground, most particularly with Nancy, with a human being who was trying to help me and take care of me, a representative actually of the fact that I'm not separate. I'm not separate. I'm part of this whole thing. And what's happening here, I shouldn't just think it's me. This is just what's happening. It's what's happening. And I'm part of it. So I've admitted by this point that things aren't working for me, begrudgingly. And then we came to this place. It was just a regular place to pause. The trail dropped off perhaps a little more steeply and a lot farther down. The creek by that time was probably 20 feet below us. It's a beautiful little creek. The sound of the water is a lovely thing. It's the only thing. That and the birds and the rustle of the leaves. Those are the sounds. And I was beginning to take it in a little bit, to just enjoy being there and not worrying quite so much. And I started to feel my balance go. and I was swaying back and forth and trying to correct for it. And you know, when your balance is really going and your legs aren't working particularly well and you're trying to compensate for falling this direction, you wind up going this direction. Then you got to overcorrect this direction. And finally, I overcorrected in the wrong direction and started over the edge. My first response was a very loud yell of some language that is not suitable for family consumption. And I heard Nancy yell just a second later, which was more of a scream. It was clear that to both of us that I was headed in a direction that could be fatal. Right over the edge, down 20 feet to a very rocky creek. And then I felt myself falling into a big bank of leaves. And I felt my head hit the ground, but padded by the leaves. And I started to laugh. And I could not, in 1,000 years, explain to you where that laugh came from, except that it was a sense that everything was going to be all right. No matter what happened, everything was going to be all right. And as Nancy gave me a hand to get up. I fell just off the trail, and that's as far as I went. And as Nancy started to help me up, I was still laughing. And I was also thanking the leaves, thanking the trees for having dropped the leaves. At that moment, and it was only momentary, I felt, I hate to use the word transcend because it's not really what it was, but I felt like I had the genuine experience of stepping beyond all the concerns of getting older and all of the concerns of being sick and the rest of it, and had a moment, really actually completely been in that moment. I had the moment of falling, it took weeks, it felt like. And so much happened between the time that I went over the edge and the time that I started getting back up. The only thing I could do was laugh. But it wasn't a laughter about a joke. It was a laughter about sort of my foolishness at having put myself in that situation, but having had all of the concerns that I had when around me was all this beauty, was a universe that that was taking care of me even if I was falling and even if I wasn't ever going to get up again. So here I was, the person who thought that he was mostly the helper. You know, I'm the one who goes into the hospital every week and sits with people who are bedridden and does everything. I do everything that I can to make them feel better in that situation, but it's mostly just about sitting with them. And you leave feeling like, wow, I've really helped somebody. Because you do. But I had never really, really been that person in the bed. Now I was. I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm a messenger from the land of the isolated, because I had isolated myself for so many years by being the one who could transcend all of this business of getting older, be better than everybody my age. There's a great t-shirt that I just saw out there, which sort of encapsulates the attitude that I had and probably still have some of. I really hate the fact that everybody my age looks so old. Yeah. Well, I'm my age and I look so old, and that's fine. I can't say that that I could report to the Buddha that I've really got this whole Upajjhatana thing figured out and I'm going to be fine now. But my attitude certainly changed. I'm the guy that soldiers on. I'm the guy that can power through. The rest of the way down that mountain, much of the way, I was sliding down on my butt because that was the safest way to get across some of these traverses. Just stick your legs out as far as you can, push up to meet your feet, stick your legs out again, just keep on going. I went for yards and yards and yards of that. The suggestion had come from Nancy. The difference was that I said, yeah, that's a good idea, I'll do that. When we finally got to the bottom, I was beginning to find my legs. I was beginning to actually be able to walk, but the lessons had not gone away. They fade, of course. It's just like any awakening an experience that you remember that you had it, not what it was exactly. But I do feel like I'm progressing along this business of aging and of getting sick. Norman Fisher talks about Maureen Stewart, who I know that a number of folks here know from years ago. But Maureen was dying from liver cancer, did not have a long time to live. And she came to do a Dharma talk. And in the middle of the Dharma talk, she said right out, "I'm not sick." And that kind of stunned everybody. And it kind of goes against the idea that I've been working with here that, well, of course, you're sick, you're dying. So one student actually screwed up her courage and asked what Maureen meant when she said that. And she responded, "Well, I know that I have cancer, and I know that there is no cure for this cancer, and I know that it will kill me within a year. But I'm not sick. This is just what's happening. I'm okay with it." When the pain is there, when the indignity is there, when it just feels awful, it's really hard to remember, oh, this is just what's happening. It's just what's happening. It's not about me, it's what's happening in the world, in the universe. And it's hard to be okay with it. Blanche Hartman has a chant from the Pali that she likes to, or liked to put into a lot of her talks, I think, on this subject. All things are impermanent. They arise and they pass away. To live in harmony with this truth brings great happiness.